You know what's crazy? There are Honda Civics out there with over 400,000 miles on the odometer, still running like they just rolled off the assembly line. And you know what's even crazier? A lot of them are still on their original spark plugs. I'm not kidding. While most cars are limping to the mechanic every 50,000 miles for a tune-up, these Hondas just keep going and going. So what's the secret? Is it some kind of Japanese engineering magic? Is Honda using spark plugs made from meteorite metal? Well, the answer is actually way more interesting than you might think. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why Honda engines are basically the cockroaches of the automotive world in the best way possible. And hey, if you want to learn more automotive secrets that'll save you thousands of dollars, go ahead and smash that subscribe button right now, because we're just getting started. Let's talk about what makes a spark plug work in the first place, because most people have no idea what's actually happening inside their engine. A spark plug is essentially a tiny lightning bolt generator that sits inside your engine cylinder. It creates a spark that ignites the air and fuel mixture, which creates the explosion that pushes the piston down and makes your car go. Sounds simple, right? But here's the thing, that spark plug is firing thousands of times per minute in an environment that's hotter than a pizza oven, with pressures that would crush your hand like a grape, and it's getting blasted with corrosive gases and carbon buildup constantly. It's basically working in hell. But most spark plugs start to wear out after about 30,000 miles. The electrode that creates the spark starts to erode, the gap gets wider, and eventually the spark gets weaker and weaker until your engine starts misfiring, wasting fuel, and running like garbage. But Honda spark plugs? They laugh at 30,000 miles. They're just getting warmed up. So what's different about Honda's approach? Well, it all starts with the material. Most cheap spark plugs use a copper core electrode, and copper is great at conducting electricity, but it's soft. It wears down fast. Better spark plugs use platinum, which lasts way longer, maybe 60,000 miles. Really good spark plugs use iridium, which is one of the hardest, most heat-resistant metals on Earth. It's so rare and tough that it's literally found in asteroids. But Honda figured out early on that if they wanted their engines to last forever, they needed spark plugs that could keep up. So they started using iridium spark plugs as standard equipment in most of their engines, especially in the models from the late 1990s onward. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not just that they use iridium, it's how they use it. Honda worked with NGK, one of Japan's premier spark plug manufacturers, to develop plugs with an ultra-fine iridium electrode. We're talking about an electrode that's just 0.6 of a millimeter in diameter. That's thinner than a mechanical pencil lead. Why does that matter? Because the smaller the electrode, the less voltage you need to create a spark, and the more focused and intense that spark becomes. It's like the difference between a big, sloppy campfire and a concentrated welding torch. That tiny electrode creates a hotter, more complete combustion, which means more power, better fuel economy, and most importantly, way less stress on the ignition system. And because iridium is so incredibly hard and has a melting point of over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that tiny electrode just doesn't wear down. Even after 200,000 miles, the electrode gap barely changes. It just keeps sparking like new. But the electrode is only half the story. The other secret is in the ground electrode, that little piece of metal that the spark jumps to. On Honda's premium spark plugs, the ground electrode is made with a precious metal tip too, usually platinum or sometimes even iridium. This creates what's called a dual precious metal design. And both sides of the spark gap are made from super durable materials. Think of it like this. If you've got a hammer made of titanium, but you're hitting an anvil made of soft clay, the clay is going to wear out fast. But if both the hammer and the anvil are made of titanium, they'll both last forever. That's exactly what Honda did with their spark plugs. By making both electrodes out of ultra-tough materials, they basically eliminated wear from the equation. The spark plug becomes a component that outlasts almost everything else in the engine. Now let's talk about heat range, because this is where a lot of people get confused. Every spark plug has what's called a heat range, which is basically how fast it can transfer heat away from the tip. A cold plug dissipates heat quickly, which is good for high-performance engines that run hot. A hot plug retains heat, which is good for engines that run cooler, or do a lot of stop-and-go driving because it keeps the tip hot enough to burn off carbon deposits. Honda engineers obsessed over getting the heat range exactly right for each specific engine. They didn't just pick a spark plug out of a catalog. They designed the combustion chamber, the ignition timing, the fuel injection, and the spark plug to all work together as one perfectly balanced system. That's why you can't just throw any old spark plug into a Honda and expect it to run for 400,000 miles. The OEM Honda spark plugs are engineered specifically for that engine, with the exact right heat range, gap, and electrode design. Here's something most people don't know. Honda engines run lean, really lean. Now, what that means is they use less fuel and more air in the combustion mixture compared to a lot of other manufacturers. Running lean is great for fuel economy and emissions, but it also creates hotter combustion temperatures. Most engines would struggle with this because the extra heat would cook the spark plugs and cause pre-ignition problems. But Honda designed their engines to handle it. They use advanced cooling systems, precise fuel injection, and yes, those ultra-tough iridium spark plugs that can handle the heat. The plugs don't just survive in that hot environment, they thrive in it. The high heat actually helps keep the electrodes clean by burning off carbon deposits before they can build up. It's a self-cleaning system that just keeps working mile after mile. Let's talk about maintenance for a second. Much because this is where Honda owners have a huge advantage. The official recommendation for most Honda engines is to replace the spark plugs every 100,000 miles. Some newer models even push that to 120,000 miles. Compare that to a lot of domestic and European cars where you're changing plugs every 30 to 60,000 miles. That's half as many service visits, half the labor costs, and half the hassle. And here's the kicker. A lot of Honda owners report going way past the recommended interval without any issues. There are stories all over the internet of people pulling spark plugs at 200,000 miles and finding them still within spec, still firing perfectly. Some people have even pushed them to 300,000 miles or more. Now, I'm not saying you should ignore the maintenance schedule, but it's pretty incredible that these plugs can handle that kind of abuse and still keep working. It's a testament to just how well engineered they are, but it's not just about the spark plugs themselves. Honda's legendary reliability comes from a philosophy of building engines that work together as a complete system. Think about it. A spark plug can be perfect, but if the ignition coil is weak, or the fuel injectors are dirty, or the valve timing is off, the engine still won't run right. Honda took a holistic approach. They designed engines with tight tolerances, high-quality materials, and components that complement each other. The spark plugs are just one part of that equation. The ignition coils on most Hondas are super reliable too. They use individual coil on plug designs that put the coil directly on top of each spark plug, eliminating the old distributor system that used to fail all the time. The fuel injectors are precise and long-lasting. The valve train uses roller rockers that reduce friction and wear. Everything is designed to last. And when you combine all of these factors together, you get an engine that just refuses to die. Now you might be wondering, can you get the same results with aftermarket spark plugs? The short answer is maybe, but probably not. There are plenty of good aftermarket spark plugs out there. NGK Denso and even Bosch make high-quality iridium plugs that will work just fine in a Honda. But here's the thing. Those plugs are designed to fit a wide range of vehicles. They're not optimized specifically for your Honda engine the way the OEM plugs are. The heat range might be slightly off. Plus, the electrode gap might not be exactly right. The thread length or reach could be different. And those small differences add up over time. You might save $20 buying aftermarket plugs, but you could end up with slightly worse fuel economy, slightly less power, and plugs that don't last quite as long. For most Honda owners, it just makes sense to stick with OEM plugs. They're not even that expensive, usually around $10 to $15 each, and you know they're going to work exactly the way Honda intended. There's also something to be said about the manufacturing quality. Honda spark plugs are made in Japan by NGK or Denso under extremely strict quality control standards. Every plug is tested, the electrode dimensions are measured to within microns. The ceramic insulator is checked for cracks, the heat range is verified. But when you buy an OEM Honda spark plug, you're getting a component that's been manufactured to aerospace-level standards. Compare that to some cheap aftermarket plugs that might be made. Who knows where with who knows what kind of quality control, and you can see why it matters. There are countless stories of people installing cheap spark plugs and having them fail within a few thousand miles, or worse, having an electrode break off and damage the engine. It's just not worth the risk. Spend the extra few bucks and get the real deal. Let's talk about installation for a minute, because even the best spark plugs in the world won't last if they're not installed correctly. The most important thing is the torque spec. Honda specifies an exact amount of torque for tightening the spark plugs, usually around 13 pound-feet for 14mm plugs and 18 pound-feet for 12mm plugs. If you over-tighten them, you can crack the ceramic insulator or strip the threads in the aluminum cylinder head, which is an absolute nightmare to fix. If you under-tighten them, they can loosen up over time, cause compression leaks, and even blow out of the cylinder head while the engine is running. I've seen it happen. It's not pretty. Always use a torque wrench. Don't just guess. And while you're at it, use a tiny bit of anti-seize compound on the threads. Just a little dab. This prevents the plugs from seizing in the aluminum head, which makes them way easier to remove next time. Trust me, if you've ever tried to remove a seized spark plug from a Honda head, you know exactly why this matters. Another thing people forget about is the spark plug gap. Even though Honda spark plugs come pre-gapped from the factory, it's always a good idea to check the gap before installation. Sometimes the gap gets bumped during shipping or handling, and even a tiny change can affect performance. The factory spec gap for most Honda engines is between 40 and 44 thousandths of an inch, but always check your specific model because it can vary. Use a wire-type gap gauge, not the flat blade kind, because wire gauges are more accurate. If the gap is too small, the spark won't be strong enough, and the engine will misfire under load. If the gap is too big, the ignition system has to work harder to create the spark, which can shorten the life of the coils and eventually cause misfires. Get it right the first time, and you won't have to think about it for another 100,000 miles. Here's something really cool about Honda's engineering philosophy. They don't just design engines to last, they design them to be easy to maintain. Have you ever tried changing spark plugs on a Subaru with a Boxer engine? You basically have to remove half the engine just to get to them. Or a Ford truck with a Triton 5.8 where the spark plugs are notorious for breaking off in the head? It's a mechanic's worst nightmare. But on most Hondas, especially the 4-cylinder models, changing spark plugs is almost stupidly easy. The plugs are right on top of the engine. You remove the ignition coils, which are held in with a single bolt each, and the spark plugs are right there. No special tools needed, no disassembly required. You can do all 4 plugs in about 30 minutes with basic hand tools. This ease of maintenance is a huge reason why Hondas last so long. When something is easy to service, people actually do it. When it's a pain in the butt, people put it off until something breaks. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Are modern Hondas still as reliable as the old ones? It's a fair question. There's a lot of nostalgia for the old B-Series and D-Series engines from the 90s that just wouldn't die. And to be honest, Honda had a few missteps in the early 2000s, with things like the automatic transmission problems in the Odyssey and Accord. But when it comes to their engines, and specifically their spark plug technology, Honda has only gotten better. The newer Earth Dreams engines use even more advanced materials and tighter tolerances than before. The spark plugs are still iridium, still built to last over 100,000 miles, and the ignition systems are more efficient than ever. In fact, some of the newer Hondas with direct injection and turbochargers are even more impressive because they're making way more power while still maintaining that legendary reliability. The spark plugs in a modern turbocharged Honda have to deal with even higher pressures and temperatures, and they still last just as long. One more thing I want to touch on is the environmental impact. You might not think about it, but using spark plugs that last 3 or 4 times longer than the competition means less waste. Fewer spark plugs ending up in landfills, less packaging, fewer trips to the auto parts store. And because those plugs maintain their efficiency over their entire lifespan, your engine runs cleaner for longer. You're burning fuel more completely, producing fewer emissions, and getting better gas mileage. It's a win for your wallet and a win for the environment. Honda has always been ahead of the curve when it comes to emissions and efficiency, and their spark plug strategy is just another example of that forward-thinking approach. So, what's the takeaway here? The secret to Honda engines running 400,000 miles isn't really a secret at all. It's just good engineering. It's using the right materials, designing components to work together as a system, and not cutting corners to save a few bucks. That's those little iridium spark plugs with their ultra-fine electrodes and dual precious metal tips are a perfect example of Honda's philosophy. They cost a bit more up front, but they pay for themselves many times over in reliability, fuel economy, and peace of mind. When you buy a Honda, you're not just buying a car. You're buying decades of engineering knowledge and a commitment to building things that last. And nowhere is that more evident than in something as small and overlooked as a spark plug. If you own a Honda, do yourself a favor. Stick with the OEM spark plugs. Follow the maintenance schedule. Use a torque wrench, check your gaps, and your engine will reward you with hundreds of thousands of miles of trouble-free driving. And if you're in the market for a used car and you want something that'll last forever, you really can't go wrong with a Honda. Just make sure it's been maintained properly, check the service records, and you might just end up with a car that outlasts your mortgage. If you made it this far, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe because we've got tons more automotive deep dives coming your way. There's actually a fascinating story behind how Honda even got into this spark plug game in the first place. Back in the 1980s, Honda was still building a reputation for reliability, but they weren't yet the household name they are today. The executives at Honda realized that if they really wanted to stand out in a crowded market, they needed to focus on something that most customers never even think about. Spark plugs. It sounds crazy, right? But they understood that reliability isn't built on one or two flagship components. It's built on getting every single detail right, even the parts that most people will never see or think about. So they partnered with NGK and invested millions in research and development to perfect their spark plug technology. That decision, made decades ago, is still paying dividends today. What's really interesting is that this philosophy didn't stop with spark plugs. Honda applied the same approach to literally everything in their engines. They obsessed over valve springs. They perfected piston ring design. They engineered oil pump systems that keep the engine lubricated at the worst possible angles and temperatures. They designed cooling systems that maintain exactly the right temperature under any driving condition. But when you really start digging into Honda engines, you realize that every single component has been thought through and refined over generations. There are no shortcuts, there's no bean counting that compromises quality. It's engineering for the sake of engineering, and that's something you just don't see anymore in the automotive industry. Let me tell you about something that really blew my mind when I was researching this. Some Honda owners have actually tracked their fuel consumption over their entire ownership experience, and they found that their fuel economy remains nearly identical at 200,000 miles compared to when the car was brand new. Think about that for a second. Most cars see a noticeable decline in fuel economy as they age. Engines get looser, seals wear out, oil gets dirtier, and everything just doesn't run quite as efficiently. But with these Hondas, it's like the engine is maintaining its factory specifications for literally decades. And you know what a huge part of that is? The spark plugs. When your spark plugs fire perfectly, you're getting complete combustion every single time. The air-fuel mixture is burning completely, all the energy is being extracted, and you're not wasting any fuel. Compare that to an engine with worn-out spark plugs that aren't firing quite right, and you can easily lose 10 or 15% of your fuel economy. Over years of driving, that adds up to hundreds or even thousands of dollars. There's also the psychological aspect of owning a Honda that's made it through 400,000 miles. When you know that your car is almost indestructible, you drive differently. Now, you're not stressed about whether it's going to make it to your destination. You're not worried about being stranded on the side of the road. You can actually enjoy driving instead of constantly worrying about maintenance. That peace of mind is worth something, and it's part of what makes Honda ownership such a different experience compared to a lot of other brands. You could drive a Honda Civic that's got 250,000 miles on it, and you'd feel more confident in it than some brand new cars from other manufacturers. Now, if you're someone who likes to modify your Honda, which I know a lot of people do, spark plug selection becomes even more important. When you're modifying an engine, whether it's tuning the fuel injection, changing the ignition timing, or putting in a turbo, you're pushing the engine harder than it was designed for. Your spark plugs are going to be under even more stress. This is where those OEM Honda spark plugs really shine because they're engineered to handle higher stresses than most aftermarket options. If you're going to modify your Honda, stick with OEM plugs or upgrade to something specifically designed for high-performance applications, like racing spark plugs from NGK or Denso. Don't cheap out on spark plugs when you're running a modified engine. It's a false economy that can cost you way more in the long run. Let me also talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough, which is spark plug longevity testing. Honda and NGK actually put these spark plugs through insane testing protocols before they ever make it into a car. And they run them in dyno test cells for thousands of hours under extreme conditions. They expose them to temperature cycling, pressure cycling, and chemical exposure. They measure electrode wear at microscopic scales. They test ignition coil output under various conditions. This isn't just quality control, this is obsessive engineering to make sure that the product they're putting into millions of cars is going to perform exactly as promised. And when you look at the real-world results, with cars going 400,000 miles or more on original spark plugs, you can see that all that testing paid off. One thing that modern technology has actually helped with is diagnostics. Older Hondas with their carburetors and mechanical ignition systems ran great for a long time, but you had to really know what you were doing to diagnose problems. But modern Hondas have computer systems that can tell you exactly what's going on with your engine. If a spark plug is starting to wear out and causing a misfire, the computer picks it up and illuminates the check engine light. This actually makes it easier to catch problems before they become expensive. You can go get your spark plug scanned, and if they need replacement, you can deal with it proactively instead of waiting for your engine to start running rough. This combination of ultra-reliable components and smart diagnostics is part of why newer Hondas are arguably even more reliable than the older ones. If you've got a high-mileage Honda that you're planning to keep for a long time, here's my personal recommendation. Get your spark plugs replaced according to the maintenance schedule, even if they seem to be running fine. And don't wait until something goes wrong. Preventive maintenance is always cheaper than waiting for a breakdown. Use OEM plugs, install them correctly with a torque wrench, and if you want to go the extra mile, check and adjust the gap yourself before installation. This little bit of effort will ensure that your Honda keeps running strong for hundreds of thousands more miles. And honestly, there's something really satisfying about knowing that you're taking care of a machine that's built to last. The Honda reliability story is really about respect for the customer. When you buy a Honda, you're buying a product designed by engineers who respect your time and your money. They don't want you in the shop every month. They don't want you to have to spend thousands of dollars on repairs. They've designed their cars to work hard and last a long time. And the spark plugs are just one example of that customer-centric design philosophy. It's a refreshing approach in an industry where a lot of manufacturers seem to prioritize short-term profits over long-term customer satisfaction. So whether you're a Honda owner looking to maximize the life of your current vehicle, or you're someone considering buying a Honda and wondering if the reputation is real, I hope this deep dive into spark plugs has given you some insight into why these cars are so special. It's not magic, it's not luck, it's good engineering, quality materials, and a genuine commitment to excellence. And those are values that never go out of style. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this entire exploration of what makes Honda engines tick. Now, if you found this helpful or interesting, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. We've got more automotive deep dives coming, and I promise they're going to blow your mind. Until next time, keep your engines running clean and your spark plugs firing true.